Welcome to the Stop Drop Gaming F1 section's review of the Malaysian Grand Prix with me, Stephen J. Hayes 83. I'm joined this evening by forum members Ollie, Sea Stealth, and Stewart Love.
Hello.
Dr. Love.
Yes.
Good evening, all.
How are you doing, everyone?
Wonderful. So, Malaysia was full of lots of events, which I'm sure Stewart will enjoy sharing his insights into.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, with the season predicted to be completely Mercedes driven, we had a Ferrari victory.
I was going to say I wouldn't say that too soon.
Well, we had a Ferrari victory, and Sebastian Vettel crossing the line. So has he got his mojo back, basically? But what did people think of the Ferrari win? Stuart, what did you think of the Ferrari win?
I'm actually quite glad to see it because they had to put it blunt, a barren spell last season of barely getting onto the podium, if at all. It adds something different to the whole Mercedes-powered domination of last season and in the first race. But yeah, it's not a bad thing for the sport. You can't say that. But
so it was quite clear that the pace was quite evident over the course of the weekend, with Raikkonen only a tenth behind. Ollie, did you think that Raikkonen would have done a little bit better had he had a bit more luck?
Yeah, I think he could have gotten P2 if he didn't have that blowout on the first lap. And I felt for him because he had the blowout on the corner where the entrance to the pit is. And had it been 10 feet behind, he could have gone into the pits and not had a problem. But he had to do that whole lap with a puncture, which just completely ruined his race.
And EJ, of course, the safety car managed to give him a bit of time back, Raikkonen a bit of time back. Did you think that even with the floor damage, that Raikkonen could have got a little further up the grid a little bit sooner, EJ?
No, because of the guys were driving too fast and too hard. So I think no, but it's still not complaining too much.
So they've come out in the press this week, having had the victory, and Vettel's quite adamant that he can mount a championship challenge here. Of course, he's only 2 races in, but he is only 3 points behind. Stuart, do we think that Vettel can mount a challenge so early in the season?
I think we have to really wait until we get into the European season to make really get much of a grip on where and who's going to be challenging for what. But China's a fairly similar track to Malaysia in terms of long corners, fairly high speed. So I think they stand a chance again in a couple of weeks or whenever the next race is. But I think, at the minute, Ferrari are looking like the biggest contenders to the Mercedes at this point.
Do you know what's incredibly frustrating? It's that I didn't enjoy seeing Mercedes dominate last year, and I am enjoying seeing another team get on their pace, but I'm not enjoying it being Vettel.
Yeah.
We got the same problem.
Do we all have an issue with Vettel then?
Hell yeah.
Towards the end of 2013, I started to like Vettel, and then he did all that stuff with Webber at the beginning of 2014. I think it was Malaysia, wasn't it?
I think you're
13
there.
Oh,
mate.
So 2012, I started to like him, and then he did the shit with Webber. And
I think he's just got he got almost a spoiled brat kind of attitude and mentality at Red Bull.
yeah,
as he came
he's
through
more mature now. He's gone to Ferrari.
I think he's had a bit of a humbling, hasn't he? Because he was seen as the golden boy of Red Bull,
top
and then,
dog, then
all of a sudden, Ricciardo came in and just showed him up for what he was, or what we all thought he was at the end of last year, which was an average racer, which sort of begs the question, how bad is the Red Bull? But we'll get to that a little later. So let's move on to Mercedes, who we all thought was going to absolutely muller the race. Were they simply just outperformed on the strategy, on the pit wall, or do we actually think that the Mercedes car would never have won this weekend anyway? EJ, what do you think?
No, the Mercedes would have won, but they were outclassed by the strategies. Because in the end, Hamilton was closing in on him and pretty fast.
I'd like to disagree with you on this one. It's a fairly downforce-oriented track, which not always traditionally has led to in Mercedes' favour, yet the Ferraris have had the pace all weekend, and came out with a fair enough result. You can't take the result away from them. Okay, strategically, safety cars and stuff like that help them, but on merit, they've got it.
I think that Mercedes got complacent this weekend. I think they didn't work hard enough on their strategy, and that's why they were out-strategized by Ferrari.
See, I tend to agree with you there. I simply think that they put too much faith in the performance of the car, when in actual fact, the actual performance of the tyre, it wouldn't matter how fast the car was, they simply would not have been able to overhaul the mountain that they gave both their drivers. And I kind of felt sorry for both of them. Obviously, Hamilton was, you could say it was a little bit more of Hamilton petulance. I like to think that it just shows how hard he was trying. But I would have loved to have seen another Hamilton victory, of course. But yeah, I really think that he was dealt a bad deck by the Mercedes that weekend.
I have to agree with you there on that, Stephen.
You have to think, though, in comparison to what Hamilton's doing with the car this season, where's Rosberg? Okay.
Well, he's still there, isn't he?
He's there, but he's lost somewhat in comparison, whether it's confidence or that bit of mojo swagger.
I just don't think Nico Rosberg is anywhere near as fast as Lewis Hamilton. Even though I don't like Hamilton, I think Hamilton's a very, very good driver, and I don't think that Nico Rosberg is even close to his level.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, though, that Rosberg was faster than Hamilton in the first two practice sessions. I know what you're going to say. Hamilton had next to no track time, and the moment he got on the track, he absolutely obliterated Rosberg. But we saw that again sort of in Australia, didn't we? In Australia, we saw that Rosberg just about had it, and then Hamilton just pulled that thing out the bag at the end. Do we think that that's what's happened from last year? Is
the psychological edge?
He's got that extra gear now, or he's used to working in that extra gear, and Rosberg needs to find the motivation to get back to that stage again?
I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah, same here.
Okay, so interesting stories that came out after Australia. A spat between Red Bull and Renault was obviously going to be spoken about at Malaysia, with culminating in Horner basically, I think it was calling Renault liars or something like that the other way around, wasn't it? Renault calling Red Bull liars and whatnot. It's getting a bit silly. And Toro Rosso seemingly doing a better job. And at the end of the race, we saw both Toro Rossos finish ahead of the Red Bull.
And they're seen as supposedly the feeder team.
Exactly. So do we think Toro Rosso are just simply making the best out of a bad situation and doing a better job than Red Bull? Is the loss of Adrian Newey really hurting Red Bull? What do you guys think?
I think you have to take into account the power plants in the back of the cars, if you know what I mean. It's going to be a huge factor at this point in time. We all know how much it's affecting the McLarens, for example, and how much lacking of power they having compared to the Mercedes, but I don't think it's that bad between the Ferrari engine and the Renault engine, if I remember rightly. But Newey would have had a huge part in designing this year's car. He wouldn't have been that far out of the picture, but it's more Toro Rosso has stepped up their game big time. You can't deny that.
And the drivers aren't that bad either.
But of course, EJ there being a huge Verstappen fan, being from Holland as a Verstappen, so you could possibly say that that's a slightly biased point of view. But I'd probably have to agree at this point that the two young bucks are doing an excellent job of coaxing the performance out of that car. And wonder what Ricciardo's thinking, as his last year's teammates just gone and won the race. The two guys that are supposed to be chasing him for his race seat have just finished ahead of him.
Everyone seemingly had no faith in them, thinking they're too young. Verstappen can't even legally drive a car in his own country and other such things yet.
Well, they changed the law, didn't they? So they changed the rules to get an F1 super license because Verstappen got one so early. They suddenly realised, perhaps we don't really want to be doing this. Why should anyone go and spend 10 years through the junior formula when up comes someone that was doing karting a matter of months earlier, has now got an F1 car or whatnot? I think it sends the wrong message. So I kind of applaud the FIA for making the changes. But in the same
completely.
instance, I'm
But
applauding
he's-
Verstappen for being able to make the jump up.
I think he's proved himself. I mean, you think of Grosjean and Maldonado, who came up later, and they were in their early 20s when they started F1 driving, but they were causing crashes every week, weren't they?
We have to say the first time Grosjean came in, he came in under, let's say, interesting circumstances.
Didn't he replace Piquet Jr.?
He replaced Piquet Jr., which
And
So-
crashed in his first race as well, did he not?
correct, which I think he just turned 20 at the time, which we had this whole same debate when he came in.
Well, there's a wonderful video on YouTube in GP2 of Maldonado and Grosjean, which went round when they both were first paired up in the Lotus, of the two of them taking each other off. I can't remember the name of the circuit. I think it was the Hungaroring or something like that. And you'd have to say nothing's really changed since then. So, I mean, if Verstappen's like he is now, one can only assume once he's got a couple of seasons under his belt, as with Button all those years ago, that he's actually going to be a fairly decent force to be reckoned with. I mean, certainly the Toro Rosso engineers feel that, if you believe what you read in the press.
I don't know.
Yeah, but how much time does he have? Because there's also a rumor going around that Renault is buying Toro Rosso.
Yes.
Yeah,
And what did Toro Rosso come out and said they'd be quite happy for that to happen. They'd in fact relish that to be the chance to be a works team, which I thought was quite clever by Franz Tost, turning a negative into a positive, as it were. But you'd have to say, if the team have that much faith in him, EJ, that no matter who bought them out, if the team believe that he's the real deal, he ain't going anywhere, surely.
Yeah, but that's also maybe that's also depending on who's running the team.
I
think go on, sorry, Stuart.
I think contracts will be honoured, but I think with the likes of the current Lotus team, and going back to Maldonado and Grosjean, a lot of it seems to be quote-unquote pay drivers. Because we all know Maldonado's bringing in a lot of money. Grosjean had...
He's got to be bringing a lot of money to be that bad on the track.
well, I think if I'm...
Is there ever going to be a day, Ollie, when people don't rip on Maldonado and Grosjean? Perhaps maybe it'll be the one day when they actually both finish a race without having any kind of incident. So anyway, with the subject of pay drivers, then it moves us quite nicely onto the last subject of the evening. Mana Marussia, who, by the sounds of it, are not using pay drivers. Are not in the sense anyway. We've got Will Stevenson, we've got, I can't pronounce his name, but Merry, I think his name is, and I'm quite merry at trying to say Merry. But Mana Marussia, they're there. They were racing. They didn't quite get on track in Australia. They managed to get out into the practice sessions in Malaysia. But are they wasting their time?
Yep.
Merry managed to finish a race distance, but he was 3 laps down. They've quite publicly come out and said they're doing their pre-season testing on race days. I mean, is that right? I hear Bernie Eccleston's getting annoyed with the situation. How do you guys feel?
Imagine that he is annoyed with the situation because he's expecting them to be at the pace of at least, well, the back markers, which surprisingly, if we said this last year, McLaren. But you've got to take into account they have been effectively up and running for less than a month as a group.
But they're using last year's car, and they're slower than last year's car. I mean, the gap is 6-7 seconds now, isn't it? I mean, essentially, they've bolted a new nose on because Force India turned around and said, no, we don't want you in the championship. Because they sold their 2015 car, I believe. I think it was Haas have picked that up, have they not?
Correct.
It'd be interesting to see.
And the
Yeah,
boys
it'd be interesting to see what they run in 16. Whether it be a Marussia badge or not.
Well, are they Marussia or are they Mana? Because I'm sure on the timesheet that they were Marussia, but everyone was referring to them as Mana, and what's his face? Graham Loudon was wearing Mana t-shirts.
To my knowledge, it is only meant to be known as Mana. F1.
It's Mana Marussia is how they're actually officially called, because Marussia had the I believe it was the contract to race this season. They had the license. Mana are now the people that own it, so they're almost sort of constrained to call themselves Mana Marussia, I believe.
Okay. due to the unique way that the F1 is funded.
Funded? Yes. Or due to the unique way that Bernie Ecclestone is funded, usually by German bankers. Can I get away with that? He might sue me. I don't know.
Yeah, we're fine.
It's only your opinion, and that's a constitutional law. You can say your opinion.
Claim freedom of speech and all that.
Yeah, freedom of speech.
I'll try the 5th. There we go.
Okay, so according to Wikipedia, now Wikipedia, of course, it is Mana Malaysia F1 team. If that answers the question.
I feel vindicated.
But
Mana
officially,
F1 team.
Mana Malaysia F1 team.
Okay. Yeah.
The constructor is known as Malaysia Ferrari.
Again, I believe it's to do with the license for the racing
from last season.
But Mana are the actual the team that are being born from it. They were in the junior formula.
To my knowledge, it was actually, don't quote me on this 100%, but it was actually Mana who were, sponsored out by Virgin back in the day.
Yeah. Virgin bought into the sport in 2010. So it was going to be Mana that went into there. Then they were bought out by Virgin, or enough sponsorship money to rebrand the team.
Yeah.
And then believe Marussia then took it on from there, which I think it was a Russian sports car maker who pulled out last season. That's why they ran out of money. That the flow of money from the title sponsor simply stopped. And there's now the ex-CEO of Sainsbury's, I believe, is in charge now. Which is why you have their test or reserve driver, King, which I think is the CEO's son.
Yeah.
So is it right that they still keep racing and still keep going out there and still trying? Or would you prefer them to pull away, make sure they've got it all right, and then come in almost at speed?
But it's tough because I think it's always good to have new teams in F1, and that makes the sport interesting. It keeps people watching, but at the same time, what's the point in having a team that turn up every week and finish last? They've been in F1 now for 4 years now, and they haven't made any gains. They haven't scored. Well, they scored.
They got 2 points, which is more than
Monaco.
The Cape.
I mean, in 4 years to make, and that was just a fluke. It wasn't. You could call it a fluke, really, because so many people crashed out of that race.
Well, he had a penalty, didn't he, at the same time? So he was actually going to finish 8th, wasn't he? And he actually ended up finishing 9th.
Correct.
Bianchi, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Forza Jules and all that jazz. I'm sure we all wish him the best.
Yep.
I don't know. So, I think we have to go on the basis that they're out there. They're effectively a couple months behind the other teams in terms of the testing and the amount of data they have for the running of the car. So them being out there, it's all track time. They can only do so much time on the simulator, only so much time in the wind tunnel. So how are we expecting them to get up to speed and even hit the back of the pack, which is pretty much the McLaren at the minute?
I think you're in the same position as Haas then, aren't you? I mean, it opens up the question to what percentage of your car can you buy from the other teams? I mean, Haas have signed a technical agreement with Ferrari, and EJ and I were watching the race at the time, and I sort of said to him, I said, look at the bottom of the side pod, there's Haas on the side of that car there now. I wish I hadn't spotted previously. I'm sure it was there in Australia, but I just hadn't seen it. Perhaps because the car wasn't towards the front. Ho, ho, ho. But anyway, they've come out and said that they're going to do this, that, and the other, and ideally they'd like to develop their own car, but they're going to have to rely heavily on Ferrari to give them bits and pieces to get them up and running as quick as possible. So, in the same sense, you'd have to say Mana Marussia are in the same boat, surely.
I think for the difference between Mana and Haas is if you take out Mana from the situation, in the past few seasons from F1, from Mana, what do they have in terms of other formulas and stuff, in terms of history? None. You can pretty much, I think Haas is one of the top NASCAR teams. Okay, it's a completely different sport, but they still have a strong motorsport background.
And what did Nigel Mansell win the Indy Championship in?
What was it, a Haas?
Newman Haas.
Yeah, which says a lot. They've been in there a long time. They know how to win races. and they have a strong, therefore,
I think
testing
pedigree is the
facility,
word you're looking for, isn't it? It's got a strong pedigree.
and will have quite clearly the funds and all the technical know-how.
But Manor, they did a lot in the lower formula, and they won a lot in the lower formula, which is why they chose to step up to Formula One. So, I mean, I know it's not the pinnacle in that as Haas is in America, but surely if you've got that, we used the word a minute ago, pedigree, but if you've got that experience of knowing what it takes, the drive and determination to get to the front, surely Manor still have the opportunity, like Sauber, to get somewhere.
I think we then got a reference back to even the James Hunt days, Hesquith or whatever. Was it Hesquith, his team, what he came through from?
Hesketh, yeah.
Yep. What simple situation? They couldn't afford to keep going, which is somewhat happened here. Do they have the funds to compete with the big boys? Quite clearly, over the past few seasons, no.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up money. What did Toro Rosso used to be at one point?
Minardi.
And where were Minardi every week?
Pretty much at the back. It's the same situation, but we gave them enough time. And where are they now?
Enough money.
Yeah, but they've been given enough time, enough funding, and are now, comfortably a mid-tier team. So
in 10 years' time, could we be seeing a Manor car at the front of the grid being driven by the world champion?
No.
I highly doubt it.
I doubt it, unless they get some serious funding.
Okay,
That's not to be
chaps.
harsh, but
okay then, chaps. So the next race is China. Ollie, what's your predictions for China?
I want to say Vettel. I think I'm going to say Vettel for the win, and maybe Kimi in third and Hamilton second.
And EJ?
I will say Hamilton, Rosberg, and Vettel.
You think Rosberg will do something?
No, Hamilton first, Rosberg second, Vettel third.
And Stewart?
I know that in terms of track layout, it's going to favour the Ferraris kind of again, because it's got similar kind of layout with long kind of long bends, semi-decent speed, but I still think Hamilton's going to be up there, so will Rosberg. So it's going to be them two teams managing the top four between themselves. What order? I don't know.
Okay then. Well, chaps, thank you for your time this evening.
Prediction?
What's my predictions?
Yeah.
I'm not going to give you my predictions.
You're no fun.
I'll give you my predictions on the Stop Drop Gaming Fantasy F1 League, and you can have a look at them once the race at China is finished. So anyway, chaps, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Thank you for your words and views.
No problem.
You've been listening to the www.stopdropgaming.com F1 Show podcast. We race every Sunday on F1 2014 and soon F1 2015. Why not come and give us a check out? Thanks again. Goodbye.
Goodbye.